if you are dealing with a mental health issue and you develop addiction and you go to get treatment, right, you have to treat both. They're two different conditions. And so it's not like, oh, I'll just treat the one and then the other one automatically is better.
What is up, you guys? Welcome back to the #1 mental health and addiction podcast, the Hopeaholics. I am your girl, Natalie Eva Marie, and these are my boys.
I'm Chad.
Hi, I'm Shane.
Make sure you guys like, subscribe, and follow us on our socials and wherever you get your podcasts.
Got a new episode dropping every Monday and Thursday. Please come check it out.
This episode is brought to you by the Infinity Group. You guys, if you or a loved one is suffering, please call us today. The number is right here on the screen. We are here for you 24/7. Now, let's get into the episode.
Dr. Russell Surasky, welcome to the
Yes.
Hopeaholics Podcast.
Yeah, welcome, man.
I'm thrilled to be here, guys. I can't tell you.
Yeah, we're excited to have you.
Thank you.
Double board certified. I mean, we have to just get it out there right now because that's
Smart guy.
huge. And you're super young. So to be this, I would say, highly achieved in the medical field is impressive, to say the least.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, but essentially what happened was first I became a neurologist, and then I was practicing neurology, nothing to do with addiction medicine. And then a pivotal event happened in my life, which transformed everything. And like so many people, I lost somebody extremely close to me.
Okay.
The most close person to me in the world, person I love the most, my brother, all of a sudden developed an addiction to opioids. And he succumbed to that because of fentanyl, Chad, actually. And watching what happened, the progression of him having, such an untypical, unfortunate story. He had an injury with sports.
Sure.
He was a senior in high school. He didn't use drugs before. We're blessed to come from a loving, supportive family. Our parents are together, 50 years, doing great in school, the whole future ahead of him. And then he had a jaw injury. And the day after, when I went to go see him in the recovery room, he said, I don't know what they gave me, but I've never experienced anything like the feeling that I had.
Sure.
And I went and looked, and they'd given him Dilaudid, which is hydromorphone, right?
Yeah.
And especially via IV, it's one of the most potent addictive forms of opioids to give somebody. And fast forward 5 treatment programs, detoxes, inpatients. It was brutal, as you guys know. And he got his longest period of sobriety, which was about a year and a half. Actually got his MSW as a social worker to help people with addiction.
Yeah.
And then, used something one night, had fentanyl, and didn't wake up in my parents' house in his bed. And from that point forward, changed everything. I went back and got trained in addiction medicine. And then I became a medical director for an outpatient treatment program in New York. And now I'm working with a big hospital system in New York. We're doing some revolutionary things to try to help really progress this field in addiction medicine, because way too many people deal with addiction, as you guys are well aware. And the field of medicine is fairly new. And it's not progressing like the other fields.
I think that's super important because there is in the medical field not only a stigma, but also I feel that doctors are not as
Versed.
in exactly what addiction is from a neurological standpoint, and don't know how to treat the addict, and think that it's almost like I don't want to say throwaway, because I'm speaking in not all, because obviously you're sitting in front of us here today and everything changed for you because of the loss of your brother, which now gives you the knowledge to put out your book for people that want to. It's really difficult for the individuals that are dealing with their loved one and not understanding the disease and understanding how somebody can not just stop. Because if it was that easy, then all of us would just stop.
And I want to piggyback on the just really quick on the stigma in the medical field of addiction, and a lot of it attributes to the addicts. I just kind of want to be clear about that, because addicts abuse the ED often because of their disease, right? So that can get frustrating as a medical professional. And I'm only saying this stuff because I'm an addict and I come from a family of doctors and nurses. My dad is a doctor as well, MD, and all of my mom and all of my sisters happen to be nurses. So I'm glad to have you here. Mm-hmm. I'm glad. I do love it when people in the medical community get involved in this mission, and you have a purpose. This basically the same purpose that I have, the loss of a loved one to fentanyl, which I call poisoning.
Everyone is at this point 1 degree of separation. If you're not affected, then someone very close to you is.
Yep.
And the fact that this is still the most, I believe, widely misunderstood condition in medicine is just, it drives what I do every day, because it doesn't have to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
From your definition, what happens in an addict's brain that is different from a normal person?
Great question. Well, first of all, addiction is a brain disease. It's a chronic relapsing brain disease that's treatable. We're not at a cure yet, but it is a brain disease. A lot of people still believe, unfortunately, the stigma is that it's a psychological issue or a moral failure or you had a bad upbringing or it's a willpower issue, but it's not. And we know that because on brain scans, specifically PET scans, which we can go into if you'd like, but we can see the very clear differences in how the brain of someone, especially in new recovery, is sort of perceiving the environment versus someone who doesn't have addiction. We also know it clinically from certain treatments that we have and how they affect the brain differently from person to person. And then, addiction, essentially what happens is very deep inside the brain, the brainstem, there's an area called the limbic system. And there's a lot of structures in there. The names are not critical, but it's the limbic system. And this is the part of the brain that you don't have control over. It drives, survival drives like hunger, thirst, sex drive, these types of unconscious drives. It runs our nervous system, all our organs and cells, so you don't forget how to run your heart or forget to feel hungry, right? Now, the conscious brain, the frontal cortex area, which is a decision-making, planning area of the brain, the rational part of the brain, it doesn't have control over the limbic center. Nature didn't want us to have that because then we could forget to eat or forget to procreate, right? And so the limbic system, when you expose your brain to these types of drugs, alcohol, opioids, and other addictive drugs, especially if you're genetically susceptible, they hijack the wiring and the circuitry inside the limbic area. And so now all of a sudden that part of the brain looks at the drug as being more important, not even as important, but more important than other survival drives. And so now with the force that you would wake up every day and look for those drives, whether it be thirst or hunger or whatever it may be, now it's to find that drug. And every day when you get up, in someone's life who's currently addicted and living that lifestyle, the rational brain still sees the destruction. It's not as if you don't see that your world is falling apart. The problem is it's contending with the limbic system, and nature made it to be extraordinarily more powerful than your rational brain. That's the beauty of nature's design, so that you always go after your survival drives. But what happens is, the world's falling apart, you're losing everything, and now you get up and the rational brain sort of speaks to the limbic system and says, we got to stop. We're losing everything. And the limbic system kind of tricks it and it basically says, okay, we will, but not today. One more time, and we'll stop tomorrow. And then it wins that battle, and then each day is the same thing until, unfortunately, God forbid, a lot of people die.
What about impulse? Like, where does your impulse fall into your brain chemistry? Does that fall into that same category, or? So
it's like the gas and the brake. The limbic system is like the gas, right? And the cortex, the rational part of your brain, is supposed to be kind of the brake, and it's supposed to check the impulses, right? And the problem is the limbic system uses dopamine as a way to understand salience, like what's important in life. What am I supposed to go after every day? What's important? And so when you have a delicious meal or you do something rewarding, it releases a certain amount of dopamine, and the limbic system says, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. These are important things I'm supposed to do every day. But when you have these drugs like opioids,
Sure.
the explosion of dopamine that happens in that area completely hijacks and rewires the whole circuitry. Now the limbic system says, this must be what I'm really have to go after. And that's why when you see people that are actively using, especially opioids, they're becoming emaciated. They're not drinking, they're dying, they're withering away because they don't even care about food. So I often tell people, even if you're not a doctor, even if you're not a psychologist, just look at how someone's living when they're in active opioid addiction. Isn't there evidence enough that there's a disease in their brain? Everything's falling apart, and you have people prostituting themselves for one more day of that drug. Clearly, their brain is hijacked.
Literally, one more hit, one more. I love your definition. Spot on, perfect. From the standpoint of an addict as well, and the facts of how powerful it is, and the stuff that you just talked about this is stuff that's been it's been studied now. We know that that's the part of the brain that is truly affected, right? And to think about it, you think about a diabetic, right? A diabetic, all of a sudden, when you tell a diabetic, you give them a plan, and diabetics are notoriously bad with their plans as well. Notorious, just like they're very similar to addicts.
Mm-hmm.
And the diabetic, you tell them, okay, you can't eat sugar.
Mm-hmm.
But what does the body crave more than anything from a diabetic? Sugar. And I watch this stuff with my dad because my dad's a doctor, and my dad's also a diabetic, and he knows that he's not supposed to do certain things. And my dad had the same types of behaviors that I had as an addict. As a diabetic, he would sneak donuts.
Oh, my dad too.
He would go to on his way to work. He would
crazy.
Yeah, he would put them in his drawer. And one day I was sitting across in my mom's office because we started Hope by the Sea together. It's a family business, and I'm sitting there and I'm looking out and I'm watching my dad take this donut out of the bag and eat it real quick and then put it back in and close the drawer so nobody saw. And I was like, "What are you doing? That is addict behavior right now." But for people to understand, if you're starving hungry, you'll do almost anything. And most people don't get starving hungry in America, but people kill people for food when you're starving. Addicts, the opioids or every other drug overpowers even food. To probably, I can't even give you it's tenfold, 100-fold, probably 100-fold.
So you're hitting on something so critical right now, which is, I think some people push back on the disease model of addiction.
Yeah, they do.
And a lot of times I'll hear them say, well, there's some voluntary control. If I held a gun to their head, I bet they wouldn't use the drug. But that's such a flawed way of considering what's a disease and what's not, because for diabetes, heart disease, all the typical things that we treat, there's tremendous areas for people to have control. And quite often, they don't use that control, and the disease gets worse. But you can heal or potentially cure some of those with just, what your choices are. And yet, no one has any trouble calling those diseases.
Yeah.
And like you hit on, I tell people, like, the way you crave a chocolate is nothing. Of course, everyone tries to relate, right? But you can't relate, because the way someone craves chocolate is nothing like someone waking up in the midst of active opiate use and has to go out and find any way to get that drug. And so, it just comes from, it's ignorance, and it certainly is. It meets every criteria for a disease. So.
Yeah, well, it's a fact that if you held that same gun to a diabetic's head, they would follow their plan.
There you go.
Yeah,
they wouldn't eat the donuts and the sugar, and they would check their blood sugar levels, and they would take their insulin appropriate.
But I like what you said too, why hitting back on like it being a disease, and we say it on here all the time how addiction or alcoholism, it does not discriminate. So it doesn't matter where you were raised, if your parents are together, if you came from a good family, if you had some traumatic event that happened to you when you were a child. Like we've had numerous amounts of guests as well as patients that come into the facility where we're all walks of life. It doesn't matter. So my question to you is, what makes an individual more susceptible to addiction as opposed to somebody else?
Good one.
Excellent question. Well, first of all, we know that there are certain genetic predispositions toward, like every other disease. Some people are more protected and some people are more vulnerable to addiction. Some people are more vulnerable to certain types of addiction. And it's not you are or you're not. It's the genetics are complicated. It's not one gene.
Sure.
It's a confluence of genes that confer upon you a degree of risk. So someone who's very susceptible may only have to be exposed to a drug like an opioid a few times for that switch to go off. Another person might be able to use drugs and abuse them for quite some time before it actually can hijack that limbic area. A couple of other things that do increase the risk is certain mental health conditions. So for example, ADHD, untreated ADHD, borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder. You know, it's not just about, take ADHD for example. It's the impulsivity of trying drugs and maybe using them more, but it's also, there's something also about the wiring of that kind of a brain that makes the ability for these drugs to hijack it easier. And so that's why it's so important that if and you guys I know this, but for the listeners out there, if you are dealing with a mental health issue and you develop addiction and you go to get treatment, right, you have to treat both. They're two different conditions. And so it's not like, oh, I'll just treat the one and then the other one automatically is better. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why, you know, when you do have a mental health issue, you definitely, when you're looking for treatment, you need to make sure that you're going to a dual diagnosis or a co-occurring disorder treatment facility that has the ability to treat that. Because, you know, sometimes, and look, I love the 12-step community, but even the 12-step community says that there are often times that you need outside help, meaning a therapist, a doctor, whatever that may be. Some people do, and I think more so even in the older times. I've been in the industry for 23 years now, and even 23 years ago when I first started, the mental health was not. You're seeing a much higher acuity patient than you were back in 2003. Yeah. So, and I don't know if it, you know, what that's actually a question for, what is attributing to that?
To what specifically?
To the patients having higher acuity mental health issues along with their substance use disorder.
Well, I mean, that's a $1 million question. You know, I think that everyone's sort of trying to figure out what's going on in that realm. It's probably multifactorial, right? Yeah. But you touched on something that's really important, which is, I don't think it's most people in recovery, certainly from my experience, and I think the evidence bears this out too, that it's not medicine or counseling, meaning 12-step or whatever type of counseling. Usually both is what's going to help somebody have the greatest chance of getting sober, staying sober, and having a fulfilling life. And I think the order, though, matters. So, for example, if you're in active use and that limbic area of your brain is on fire looking for the drug, you could sit in meetings all day long. You could, you know, and the minute you get out, you're going to run and find that drug because that limbic area is on fire, and that's what's going to happen. It's going to drive your rational brain to make an excuse and find that drug. There's just no way around it. Yep. You have to use medicine. You have to cool off that area so you can actually sit and take in what you're hearing in the room or counseling and really listen and integrate it. That's never going to happen if your brain's on fire. And so first you got to cool that down with medicine, and then counseling could be very important because listen, once your brain is not screaming to looking for the drugs every moment, then you have life ahead of you, and that's the harder part. Detox and withdrawal, this is a very big distinction that's important. Detox and withdrawal is not treatment for addiction. You're treating someone's withdrawal, right? That's actually the easy part. You know, going to detox and treating withdrawal. After that is when treatment for addiction starts, the loss of control. You know, if it was so easy, if addiction was just the physical dependency, which a lot of people confuse, then you could just send everyone to detox and they'd be cured. But that's not what we see. We see that detoxes are revolving doors for the same people. So treating the withdrawal and doing detox is an absolute must. Obviously, you guys know it could be dangerous if you don't help somebody, and they'll never make it through to getting treatment for the next part if you don't get them the detox. But then treatment for addiction starts, and I think that's, you know, and so once you are using medication-assisted treatment, say, for example, to try to help in the early stages of staying sober, counseling really becomes very important, because what about social support system, right? You're not hanging out with the same people anymore. So having structure and social support is critical. Identifying and avoiding triggers. Man, have we learned how powerful triggers can be in the new science with addiction and the brain. And we can certainly talk about that. But to have a program where you have a good chance to stay sober, you better be paying attention to those things. And that medicine can do that for you. Medicine's fantastic.
Well, they had that study with mice, cocaine or social behaviors. Did you see that? And they picked social behaviors over the cocaine once they introduced social interactions.
I did not see that.
Yeah.
Maybe I have heard about it.
Wait, what they?
Well, they
Love one.
Loved one.
Love one.
Love one.
Yeah, against cocaine.
Against cocaine.
Yeah, on the mice.
On the mice.
Yep.
But you got to be careful with when I hear those stories, because sometimes people may take away the fact that you don't need medicine. I don't need medicine no matter what.
No.
It's
all inclusive.
Yeah, and so that's not what we see in human beings. I mean, the drug overpowers and hijacks the brain so much so that, you know, medicine often is needed, and you don't want people to feel there's a stigma with that.
Sure.
You know how many times I have patients come to me and say, I know that I'm doing great, but, you know, when I go to 12-step meetings, sometimes people say to me, I'm not sober.
Yeah.
Or if I'm on Suboxone.
Yep.
Or people hear that constantly. Even Vivitrol, which I'm sure you guys have heard of or utilized, you know, that's not even an opioid. And yet still people tell them that they're not sober.
But that in and of itself is complete ignorance. If somebody's
well, that's
saying
like
that.
I think
it's all ignorance.
It's humans like to ruin things. Whether it doesn't matter what it is, it could be religion, because people have an ill connotation. But it's like the humans are the ones that mess things up. If somebody comes in, we've had a woman came on our podcast just actually a couple of days ago, and she was talking about what Suboxone has done for her, and she kind of mentioned the same thing where she had to find her meeting where it accepted that she was taking that, where we think where sobriety for anybody is, there's not a one-stop shop. So like what works for me or works for Chad, it works for Shane. Everyone is different because we all have different needs and we're all wired a little bit differently. And so for her, now she's at a point where she is now tailoring the amount to come off of it and doing it the right way.
But hopefully not because they told.
No, because
someone,
she wants to.
Yeah.
So she found her meeting that accepted her sobriety and where she takes chips and where she's doing the 12 steps and doing her thing and not ostracized or looked down upon because she is seeking that medical treatment to help facilitate and keep her on her sobriety journey. Because if she wasn't on Suboxone, if she would still be in the place that she is today? Probably not.
I will say, true and very true. And I will say that if, when people do go to the 12-step community, and I'm saying this to the addicts that are out there that, may be participating in medication-assisted treatment. It's not necessary to raise your hand in the group setting and be like, hey, I'm on Suboxone maintenance or whatever it is. It's really not even the platform to discuss your medicine. That's where it's a place to come and come together and talk about your experience, strength, and hope, what's happening in your life. And then you have a sponsor, right? So in the 12-step community, we have a sponsor. Hopefully you pick a sponsor that, and all of this stuff, anything that you do with a doctor or anything, it has to do with your sponsor, your doctor, and the God of your understanding, if you have one. And as far as the rest of the people's business in Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or any of the other 12-step programs, it is literally an outside issue. Hence, we shouldn't even be giving advice on it. So and I will say that we don't give advice in Narcotics Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous. And I won't say that the members all don't make mistakes and they have their opinions and everybody knows what opinions are like. And some of those people in there are assholes. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
But that is actually not the stand of the 12-step program. So I encourage people to keep coming back no matter what.
And finding the meeting that is, most.
And if one's not working for you,
Totally.
there are thousands of meetings every day across the United States and the world. And find a different one that's more loving, kind, and accepting, because that is what we are supposed to be in that community.
What is your take on it? On the Vivitrol and Suboxone and those types of medications for the addict or the alcoholic that is suffering?
So in a broad sense, it's like any other medical condition. Sometimes we need to use medicine.
Sure.
And medicine saves lives, certainly with addiction. I mean, the evidence for that is overwhelming. And so if it can help somebody with a disease that they're having and can help save their life, then it makes no sense not to offer it as a treatment. And, and then, of course, counseling becomes very important, like we just mentioned. I happen to think, and you'll hear doctors talk about this a lot, but I have to say, I happen to think that 12-step meetings happen to be the best overall form of counseling for people with addiction. That's what I see in practice.
Sure.
And, there's two major studies, actually. A lot of people don't know this. There's two major medical studies, one out of the University of Stanford and also a Cochrane review of 30 studies, which show that they are the most effective in addiction treatment. And because, listen, accessibility, they're everywhere. It's free. It's structured help. It's emotional support, sponsorship.
Totally.
I mean, the 12 steps, I think they should teach that in school.
I do too. I say it all the time. I say the non-addict would benefit from the 12.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Humanity as
Oh my
a
gosh,
whole.
taking accountability, learning your character defects, not making the same mistake over and over again, not pointing the finger at the other person, looking at your own shit and figuring out how to live life, and it's really, I feel, such a useful tool for the non-addict as well.
And there are a lot of misconceptions out there, certainly. One, it's religious.
Right.
It's more spiritual.
Totally.
It's a God of your own.
And you
design,
don't even have to have one.
It could be the tree. It could be the
It
branch.
could be the group as a whole. A group as the group as a whole
exactly.
is more powerful than one person by
Yeah.
themselves.
There's a whole chapter in the book on exactly that. And another part in the book I talk about is step one. I hear a lot of people push back and say, I don't want to feel like I don't have control. But they're not interpreting it that right. And I know you guys probably know this, but it doesn't say that you don't have any control. It says when you're using the drug, you're out of control.
Yeah.
But when you're in sobriety, you're powerful. You're not powerless. And I think that's the key. It's just an acknowledgement of the condition you have.
Sure.
That when you use, you're out of control.
Yeah.
Soon as I pick up, I'll become powerless
Totally.
over my next next one.
And if you can't accept that, then you're not going to make it.
Yes.
Because that's just a recognition of the condition.
I mean, I could literally, and I would never do this, and I would never want to do a study on this, but take any addict.
Yeah.
Take me, who's got 7 years plus of sobriety right now. Take me. Give me my drug of choice today, and I guarantee you won't see me for a long time, because that second one will be my turn into 1,000. And we say it in Narcotics Anonymous, 1 is too many and 1,000 is never enough. But today I have a choice. I have a choice.
Powerful.
I'm powerful today.
I love that. I love that, like, kind of switch, because I think that's a big one that I hear from either girls I sponsor or people that have a hard time with, like, the religious aspect of it. And they're looking at it to, well, one, it's also an excuse, because let's be honest, anybody that's walking into a 12-step meeting, like, we're not walking in here because we're winning at life. You know, you're walking in there because your life has become shit, and you're and you don't like who you are. Things have all of a sudden wrecked. Like, you know what I'm saying? You're coming in broken. So I'm like, it's clear, but each individual, as we all know, because it requires actionable steps of each individual to maintain that sobriety, or else it would be that easy. You know, then everybody could get sober by going into detox for a week and then coming out and being like, poof, I'm all well. But we all know that it requires a lot more work than that, whether it's with the medication to help you kind of taper and get on your way, or the outside counseling, and then obviously the 12 steps and so on. But how long did it take you to write this book? Now, it's not out yet, right? It's coming out?
It's not out yet. It's available to pre-order it.
Okay.
But it's not out yet. Next month it comes out.
Okay.
It took a couple of years.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to make the book so that no matter who you were,
Sure.
if you were suffering, or if you had a family member that was suffering, or even if you're a psychologist,
Sure.
or even a physician, if you read that book or pick up even a section of the book, it's a very easy read, made on purpose, right? But anyone, no matter who you are in that spectrum, you're going to learn a lot that you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
The book is called, you see that this book will save your life. And that's why I made sure that it did that. So no matter who you were, you could pick it up, and it literally could do that for you. Or if you're a doctor, you're patient. Because like you said, doctors, unless you're in this field, they know so little. You know, it's really sad.
Yeah.
It is.
You know,
it really is.
And they just don't make it part of medical education.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and
At least it's a board now, huh?
it's new.
Yeah. Is it like one of the newest or the newest?
I think it's either the newest or second newest. But I believe you will see doctors going into it more and more, because the fact of the matter is, no matter what field you're in, patients coming in to see you have this problem.
Oh, yeah.
And then you just feel helpless and they may start trying to talk to you about it. And what do doctors typically do? They just kind of try to skip over it, because they don't know what to tell you to do.
Yeah.
They don't understand the medicines. They don't understand, the disease.
10% of America suffers from addiction, right? Is that a valid? So 1 out of every 10 people seeing a doctor, what are the chances that 1 out of the 10 has the same?
Well, I think especially now too, because of the fentanyl crisis.
Yeah.
Like, why do you
Mental
think
health is on
how
the
are
rise,
we in
everything.
like the worst, I think, opioid epidemic ever in history right currently at this moment?
Well, we were already there, and then here comes fentanyl pouring across the border, the southern border, and that's where it comes from. China's actually involved in it, and it's well understood what happens. China brings the precursors to this area called the Port of Manzanillo in Mexico. Chinese nationals in a certain area there then take the powder, they press it into fake pills, whether to make them look like Xanax or Adderall.
They're so good at
Any
it
of
too
them.
now. You know,
Oh, the
They look
numbers.
we had the Orange County Sheriff on, and he says that they look better than the real ones.
Yep. And then the cartels drive it across the border, and they use the communication systems that the Chinese give them, and so that they know they're not going to get caught. And then the money is laundered back in Chinese banks. It's a sick thing that's happening. And we keep developing better and newer treatments to help people with addiction now, but we can't turn the tide unless something changes that stops the fentanyl from pouring in, because it's too deadly. It has changed the landscape completely, and I'll tell you why I think that is. You know, even as bad as the opioid epidemic was with oxycodone and Purdue Pharma and how we got here, I still think there's a large swath of the population that said, you know what, okay, that's really bad stuff, but you have to have an addiction to have a problem there. And it's me, my family, we don't have addiction. So, that's a sad story, but it's not about us. But now, because of fentanyl being laced into everything, Adderall pills, Xanax pills, cocaine, everything. Now, if you have an adolescent at home or you have a kid going to college, how are you not frightened out of your mind? Because one granule in one pill is sudden death.
Yeah.
And so that I think, and adults who like to party
Sure.
sometimes,
Oh, yeah.
now they can be dying. So you don't need the addiction. Most people overdosing now on fentanyl, they don't even have addiction. They're just trying something. There's no time to go to a treatment program.
Totally.
And so that's changed the whole landscape here. And so I think that ultimately may be what pushes society.
Yeah.
Because they feel vulnerable, the people that didn't before. And that may be what gets things to move.
That you are, I mean,
Dead on.
you are spot on
Yeah.
because the two people that I see dying are non-addicts that are
Yes.
trying stuff for the first time,
Yep.
or recreationally using drugs, and they got the wrong thing this time. The other scary part, though, that's very scary because I do have a son in college, and I worry about that.
How can you not?
And my son, my son's a good boy, but like, what if? What if he goes to a party? What if somebody gives him an Adderall? What if he thinks he needs to cram for a test? It worries me because, I lost my son-in-law, and he had bought a pressed Percocet off the street, and my daughter found him dead. And but the other people that are dying and are the people that come to treatment, and they get sober for 60, 90 days, and they go back out. Now, the addicts on the street really aren't dying at rapid rates because they build up such a high tolerance to it. But they go back out, and their tolerance is gone, and the one pill that they thought they could do is the lethal dose.
That's very true. That I can't tell you countless. First of all, we should acknowledge that pills on the street, almost none of them are real.
Right.
Because a lot of the doctors that were flooding the streets, they're either in jail or they retired, and doctors have run scared from that, and as they should have, because they basically, many of them conspired with Purdue and got kickbacks and everything else and poured these drugs onto the streets. But now there aren't real oxycodones on the street. Because so most of them are fentanyl. But you know what? A lot of people say, why would somebody, first of all, why would a dealer want to sell drugs that kill people? It kills their customers.
yeah.
And why do you hear sometimes that people in addiction try to chase after it? And I can tell you what I've seen as far as answers to those questions, but I'd love to know what you guys see with that.
Well, the answer to your first question is, why would somebody sell a drug that is killing 300 people every single day? The answer is that it's addicting 10,000.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a real number, but it's a big number. So the 300 is an acceptable collateral damage. It's like when you have a retail store and you always what do they call it again?
Lead loss.
Lead loss.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
So that's the answer to question number two. One, because that's, and I used to ask that question. I'm like, why are they? And I actually came up with that answer when we had the Orange County Sheriff on our podcast.
Or it could be you can go even a little deeper into like conspiracy, where it's like just killing the younger generation of our population. So that way that's quite helpful to other countries also, from a military standpoint to all of the other things, and just creating a really unhealthy place for American citizens.
That's definitely
So-
my conspiracy theory on that.
I mean, I think that's very because we all know where we've spoken about fentanyl. I feel like, especially with people like yourself, I feel horrible for you and your family's loss. However, look what a tragedy was birthed, something that is really a voice that is a necessity, from you being on the news to you using from a medical knowledge, because we all know that people like to hear those numbers and like to have those facts. And then a tragedy was birthed through Chad creating this podcast to be the voice to get it out there, because I think hitting on something that I think is so important is for individuals to know that this is going to kill your son or daughter that is not an addict, or the individual that is a CEO of a Fortune 500 out there and wants to take his crew out on his little yacht for a little, celebration of a awesome week. Well, everything that you're getting, those little party drugs, or kids at college, they think that they're cramming for finals. That's who it's going to kill, the non-addict as well. So I feel like that's a hard pill for people to actually understand and consume, of how real it is from that 1 degree of separation. And that's what's happening now, is that people are actually losing people that they thought were, oh my God, wait, but Sally was a good kid. And it's knocking at your front door.
Absolutely. I'll tell you something fascinating. They did a study where they gave fentanyl test strips to people that were in active opiate use, and so they could test their drugs and see, and what do you think happened? They used them, but even when it was positive, they still used the drugs. And I talk about this, when a brain is hijacked by these drugs and in full blown use, right? It doesn't, I had patients that would say, like, I purposely seek out this dealer because I say, but the fentanyl can kill you. And they go, yeah, but I figured I'll probably just get even more high, but I won't die, because the limbic area is driving it, saying, oh, you'll be fine. Just, this is going to be the best high, so let's go find this guy. He has the strongest stuff. The rational part of, well, I'm more likely to die then, doesn't get through. And so that's one of the reasons why someone with addiction is chasing after those dealers. And then the other thing with kind of what you were saying is fentanyl kind of metabolizes fast, and the withdrawal comes fast. Yeah. And faster than heroin. Yeah. And so dealers sell more.
Right.
Yeah. You can't hang out and not and feel okay as long as you could with heroin. Yeah. And so another reason why they still make more money even if people die.
Yeah, because people are on that chase a lot sooner.
And that half. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on this one. That it seems to me that people are getting physically addicted faster to fentanyl than they would to heroin. And I guess the other part of my question on that is that because the half-life is shorter and that it's more potent than heroin?
It's a loaded question. I'll tell you why. Because there is no one fentanyl. These drugs are made in these clandestine labs, and they're all like analogs of fentanyl, right? Yeah. And heroin, right? Heroin, we know heroin's mixed with stuff, right? When people use heroin, it's not 100%, pure heroin. It probably never was. Yeah. So everything is thrown off from that. But I'll tell you what we do see, and this gets into some of the details a little bit. We find that when people are coming in and they're using fentanyl, which is most of what everyone's using now. If you urine test people, which you guys know, we get back all fentanyl. It doesn't matter if the person says, I've only used oxycodone, I've only done this. No. It's all fentanyl, right? And if you try to help them get onto medication-assisted treatment, specifically like Suboxone, for example, right? The period of time that you have to go through the withdrawal before you can induce onto Suboxone used to be, with real oxycodone, 12, 16 hours. Mm-hmm. Now, what you see is you're throwing people into precipitated withdrawal, which I know we didn't talk about this yet, but you guys know what I'm talking about. You can't induce them as easily because the period of time for the opiate to leave their brains, to which you can then have the buprenorphine, the Suboxone, it's extending, and now people are waiting 48 hours. And the problem with that is, unless a doctor's really helping them be comfortable during that time, they're not going to make it. They're going to relapse. And so that's another sort of complicating factor we're seeing.
There's definitely a high ACA rate from in the first 48 hours at detox, higher than it used to be. Our listeners probably aren't versed as we are. Can you explain what precipitated withdrawals are?
Sure. So if you're actively using a drug like an opioid, right, whether that's heroin or oxycodone or fentanyl, and then you were to suddenly stop, you're going to have this withdrawal process that typically goes on plus or minus 7 to 10 days for the acute kind of withdrawal and all the awful symptoms. And by the way, when doctors say, oh, it's like a flu, it's not like the flu. It's so much worse than that. Some people become suicidal, depression, the panic attacks, the restless legs that don't stop, the horrific insomnia that you don't sleep for days, you know, and every minute feels like an hour. It's brutal. So for anyone listening that may not understand that, it's horrific. And if you don't help someone through that process, they're usually not going to make it. They're going to go out and relapse, right? So in order for you, so now that's a regular withdrawal process, okay? Now, if you were to use a medicine to say help them, which we call medication-assisted treatment, so the most common one is Suboxone. The drug is Buprenorphine. Now, you would typically have to wait for the drug that they're using that's still in their brain to leave their brain before the new one comes in, because the new one, the way it binds to those receptors in the brain and helps stabilize them, if you have another opiate there, it's going to push it off with a lot of force and cause opiate withdrawal that comes on, like, you know, all of it at once, you know, and that's even more brutal for the person to go through. And so you really want to let the opioid leave first, and typically that would take 16 hours. Say they were addicted to oxycodone or heroin, whatever. It would take a day usually. Now, with fentanyl, what we see is that if you try to take Suboxone, induce them onto the Suboxone medicine, and it's 24 hours, you're going to push them into precipitated withdrawal. Now, a lot of patients come in and say, it's been a day and a half, doc, and I went into precipitated withdrawal in 36 hours. What's going on here? 48 hours. And what happens is, because the fentanyl is a different animal. Wow. And so now patients have to go through a much longer period of sitting there in withdrawal. And what does that mean? A lot of times they're not going to make it. They're going to relapse because their brain is screaming at them in withdrawal, you know, and so this is where having a doctor who has some experience and really a specialist can help give them comfort medicines to help them feel, okay, I can do this. I'm going to make this. I don't have to call the dealer. I'm going to be okay. And then you can easily have someone go through 2, 3, 4 days if you help them. But if you say, oh, here's one low dose of, some, ibuprofen and Tylenol and a little clonidine, it doesn't cut it. It just doesn't work. And so you can't do that. You really have to help people be comfortable, and then they can make it. But this is a problem right now.
Yeah, because that is a very hard process to kind of help an individual walk through, because everyone is going to be very different as well. So it's a hard one to kind of stay upon, especially with fentanyl. I can't believe it takes. That's a big number jump from 12 to 16 hours for like an opioid to be
48 hours.
To 48 hours. Yeah.
That's insane.
48 hours is a
jump.
long time to feel like shit.
Yeah.
And
a significant increase from what it was prior. It's nuts.
And I feel like they feel like shit sooner. Yeah. Because there's ways to do it with when methadone when people were on methadone maintenance and they wanted to get off methadone maintenance, you used to have to wait like 72 hours, and then you could hit them with Suboxone or Subutex. I think you could hit them with Subutex. And I'm not a doctor. I just want to be clear. I just work in I own a treatment center. And I sometimes play a doctor for Halloween, but that's it, guys. That is it. And I don't do a very good job of that. But I've seen sometimes the Subutex was able to go hit the methadone faster. Is it able to hit the fentanyl withdrawals faster without the naloxone in the buprenorphine?
No, actually, it's a bit of a misconception. The naloxone that's in with the buprenorphine, this can, if the listeners don't know about this, but I bet a lot of them have.
They probably do.
Yeah.
Right? So Suboxone is buprenorphine, which is the active medicine, and it has a small amount of what's called naloxone, which, by the way, is in Narcan.
Yep.
That is Narcan, when you're, not to confuse people, but Narcan that's the spray that you can wake someone up from an overdose. It's life-saving. But they put a little bit of that with the buprenorphine. And you say, well, why would they do that? Wouldn't it be throwing people into withdrawal? It doesn't, because when you take it by mouth, how you're supposed to take the Suboxone, the naloxone actually doesn't get released. The reason they put it in there is because when they just had buprenorphine, the Subutex, people were trying to inject that and abuse it to get high from it. And so they figured if we put naloxone in there, now if you inject it, then naloxone comes out and puts you into withdrawal. And so it's a deterrence to abuse it, but it doesn't come out. So it's a common misconception with patients that I want the one alone, buprenorphine, because it's easier for me to get on it from where I was. The naloxone will make it longer, but it doesn't. You can use either one, but that is a sort of something that goes around. I've had patients come in and say, no, I absolutely need to. Then the naloxone is going to make it harder for me. And I try to explain to them that that's not the case. The only time we really use buprenorphine alone is in pregnancy, because I think a lot of evidence is coming out saying it really doesn't matter, quite honestly. But until we have 100 studies proving that, we're not going to do anything in pregnancy that isn't studied. So, but again, I know this is getting into some of the weeds here unless you've been through it yourself, for the listeners, but I'll bet a lot of people know exactly what I'm talking about. This is part of the whole process.
It is. What about Vivitrol?
So I think now a lot of people may not know about Vivitrol. A lot of people have heard of Suboxone or been on it, but Vivitrol is much more rare for doctors to help people with. I think it's awesome. I use a lot of Vivitrol in practice, but the key is the reason I've been able to do it is because, again, so for Vivitrol, you don't have to wait 2 or 3 days. You usually have to wait a week. Okay. And a lot of people, look, it's much easier for a doctor to just give somebody Suboxone. Okay. And so a lot of times Vivitrol isn't even offered. Why? Because the doctor doesn't want to try to convince the patient that it's an option. And usually a lot of times the patient will push back and I don't want to be sick for a week. But the reason that I think I've been successful at getting a lot of people on Vivitrol is because I use a very sort of successful combination of comfort medications that really does keep people comfortable. And if you can do that and you can tell them you're going to do that, then a lot of people say, you know what? I don't necessarily want to be physically dependent on an opiate. Again, I'm getting off the one I'm abusing. Suboxone, look, I think Suboxone saves a lot of lives and I prescribe it all the time, but because it's not one size fits all for anybody in all medicine. But a lot of patients are like, wait, doc, because a lot of the time the reason they want the Suboxone is they're so afraid of the process that they're going to have to be off the opiate for. But if you tell someone, listen, don't worry about that. I got you. You're not going to go through withdrawal. I'm going to give you a set of medicines and you're going to be able to stay home and be completely fine. You're going to be able to be relaxed. You're going to be able to be calm and you're not going to be climbing the walls. Do you still want Suboxone or would you then take the Vivitrol? Vivitrol, for the listeners, is not an opiate-based medicine. It binds to the opiate receptor, doesn't release any dopamine, but it does equally drop cravings, which is phenomenal. And the studies back this up now. I saw that in practice, but now there's studies head-to-head showing that. It stops the cravings, and it acts kind of like a shield. So if you go out and you take an opioid, it won't get through and bind to those receptors. So you won't get re-addicted, and you also won't get high, and you won't overdose. So Vivitrol is a very cool option for people to be on. Usually people are on it for 6 months or a year as they go through a program, counseling, they get their life together. And then it's different for everyone. Some people come off at different times, 6 months or a year, whatever. When you're looking at the whole situation, it's person to person. But the reason why most people never get it is because doctors don't help them through the withdrawal process. So it's never even offered, basically. And so I started using a lot of different medicines to help, which I think my neurology background helped me to create. And so now if you can keep people comfortable, a lot of them want Vivitrol. And I see phenomenal results with that. And so I think Vivitrol is awesome.
Is Vivitrol a pill?
And Vivitrol, it's a shot once a month. And it's long-acting naltrexone. It's basically like having Narcan running through your body 24/7 for a month. Yeah. But it helps the receptors in the brain kind of go back to more of what they were before. When you're on an opiate drug like a Suboxone or a methadone, it keeps them sort of stagnant at that place that's changed. Yeah. And, Vivitrol can help. Also, Vivitrol is pretty amazing. And this ties into what we were talking about. When you have addiction, I don't care what the addiction is for. Yeah. Gambling disorder, hijacks the same area. Gambling disorder, opiates, even alcohol hijacks the same area. And that's why Vivitrol is approved for alcohol addiction. It helps people stop drinking. It helps people with opiates. And people say, well, how could it treat both things? Well, because the ultimate pathway of how it hijacks your brain, Vivitrol is buffering that area. And so it's a very cool option of treatment. It's not one size fits all,
Sure.
but it's if you can help people through that's the key. You got to be able to help people through that with the process. With alcohol, there is no time period you have to wait. You could literally have drank that day and give yourself a Vivitrol injection. And what it does for alcohol is most people will feel like they're not having the cravings, but even if you do drink on alcohol, most people will take a drink and they'll put it down. They're not into it. It doesn't grab them. So they could be like, oh, they'll have one and put it down. Now that we all would think is impossible. But the Vivitrol buffers, it blocks the endorphins and the dopamine from binding, and now it's like basically having seltzer. The studies on it showed that they took 100 plus people, and they gave them one placebo injection and one Vivitrol. The average person in the group was drinking 15 heavy drinking days every month. Okay, like 6 drinks in the sitting, 15 times a month. It went from that to less than 1 day in a month with Vivitrol. Because if you drink on it, you don't get sick. This isn't like Antabuse.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
You just don't you're not into it. And so a lot of people try to do that, though. They'll try to get Vivitrol and then kind of drink in control.
Yeah.
The reason that's a problem is because once the Vivitrol stops, eventually it's going to stop. If you try to do that again, it's going to go off the rails again because the Vivitrol's not there. So you can't, we try to use Vivitrol to get people to really stop, but some people do it like,
of course,
try
like
to drink in control.
Yeah.
And so that's a double-edged sword there. But
and all these medicines are ultimately to help the individual comfortably go through that withdrawal process and then go into counseling or a 12-step program to actually get their lives back together. This is not a for life type protocols.
No, but I'm going to tell you something, all right? I don't want people to feel, because there's a stigma about medications for addiction. Oh, you're going to be on it forever. Well, you know what? First of all, if that's needed for that person, so is it with blood pressure and diabetes and many other conditions. If the problem is with opiates, they're so deadly that one relapse kills you, right? So when you're dealing with that, there's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, the medicine's not hurting you, and if it helps keep the compulsions down, if you feel like you're not triggered by things when you're on the medicine, and it keeps you safe and alive, then some people should stay on it. It's not one size fits all, but to say that there's something wrong if someone needs that, I think is terrible advice.
Right. I think.
What, you want to know what I think? I think he's right. I'm a fan of trying abstinence. First, for people that are new opioid new users in general.
I'm with you.
But I am like, you know what? There are people that their lives, if we can improve somebody's life, if we can improve the fact that they're not out there killing themselves on a daily basis, so be it.
Agreed.
And I'm a big fan of Vivitrol because Vivitrol, and I'm a bigger fan of, I think, the Sublocade shot versus the actual Suboxone, because the addicts have a lot of addicts have figured out how to abuse that as well and utilize it in between their withdrawals sometimes to they're very
Crafty.
bright and crafty and smart individuals. But the Vivitrol is, it can be a game changer for somebody that's really struggling with abstinence, because you literally can't get high from opiates. I think it's possible. Is it possible to overpower the Vivitrol?
So anything is possible, and it certainly can happen, especially with the fentanyl and stuff. But let me tell you, it's much more likely to protect the overdose from happening than not, okay? And so is it possible we can come up with a scenario where, I've had patients say, you know what, in the last week of the Vivitrol, I went and I tried, and I felt high, like with the fentanyl or something. So there's obviously a point to which these drugs can push past it. And I think that the company Alkermes, who makes Vivitrol, I suggested to them that they really should start changing the formula and making it more powerful, because when that came out, there was no fentanyl happening like this.
Yeah.
And I think they need to change it, the formula, make it stronger, last longer, because some people, they metabolize it too fast. And you're in the 3rd or 4th week, and now I'm giving people naloxone pills to take every day to boost up the level. And so I think that you're right. It could, but come on, if you're have someone in your family and they're out at night and they have an opiate addiction, how do you even sleep?
You can't.
If they have Vivitrol in their system, at least you feel like there's some protective
For sure.
mechanism there, you know?
At least there's a chance.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
So what's the other half of this? The other half is mental health.
Of course.
So how do we prevent? I mean, that's a tough. How do we prevent this? I mean, people are predisposed, different demographics. How do we prevent that with mental health? Like there's an epidemic in mental health going on right now in this country.
100%.
That's on the rise. The opiate epidemic, everything is on the rise.
So,
And the mental health is driving the use of these pills, I would think, or a big proponent of it.
you're absolutely right. I mean, and that's why if you're having symptoms of a mental health issue, just stigma with that, obviously, too.
Yeah.
And so you have to go talk to a doctor or, reach out. Even if you don't have a psychiatrist, talk to your primary care doctor. They'll steward you and help you get to someone who can help you.
Yeah.
But you can't ignore these conditions and hope they just go away, because they don't go away.
No, they don't. And I think that one, I do believe I was predisposed to addiction, and two, I truly believe that I have ADD. I'm not sure if I have the H, because I never was like the kid jumping off the wall, but like I just couldn't focus. And what happened for me is that, marijuana was great. I had fun, but I never really got addicted to it. I drank, but I don't really ever consider myself like an alcoholic. Do I think I can drink and not do other stuff? No. But when I did methamphetamines the first time, when I did that first line, little tiny, changed my life. I could think, I could slow down, I could do my homework. I wasn't lazy. I could clean my room. And so that drug, I'm not kidding you, it hijacked me on the very first one. I was like, this was in 1988. I was like, why didn't somebody tell me about this sooner? I was in 8th grade, the summer right after 8th grade, and I got addicted. And I started using it every day for the next 10 years of my life. So I do believe I had an underlying psychological issue, and on top of that, to combat that, I also had a sexual trauma that had happened to me, in my younger years too. That, as a young boy, you just don't even know how to deal with that. So continued to mask that stuff. Plus the ADD was really, fueled my addiction to its utmost level. Oh, and the fact that it's also, I wanted to I think that was more of a statement on that, but also the after, if you have anything to say on that, then chronic and progressive, the disease of addiction, chronic and progressive. Would you agree with that?
100%.
For sure.
It is chronic and progressive, and that's why these sort of harm reduction policies that you see are they're horrible. I don't agree with them. Everyone has different opinions on it, but I think you're just letting people continue to use drugs that are completely destroying their brain, their body,
Totally.
and it only gets worse and worse. It's not as if they just get frozen in time and use every day and everything's fine. That's how it's sort of portrayed. That's not what happens. It's progressive, and they'll die.
And it's where I feel people have this fallacy where I like to test things on my own and know that in my own case, it is a fact. Because you hear it when you go into rooms, right? So like if you stopped using or drinking at, say, for myself at 23, right? And did not pick up again until I was 26, it doesn't matter. You would think that everything was like, slate is back to zero. You pick up like you never left off.
Yeah.
And like it's for sure, that is fact. And if not, you often running and gunning, even times 10.
Even worse.
So it's like,
yeah, even worse. Because I same kind of story. 9 years sobriety, went out, and was worse.
Very rarely in medicine can you use terms like always and never, but in this case, every single patient that said, it doesn't matter how long sobriety was. Once that switch was turned on, even if people will say, but doc, like I had time where I played around and it was fun and my life wasn't off the rails. I was using Oxy and everything was cool for a year. And then when all of a sudden everything went downhill. So how, but now those patterns in the brain are already set.
Yeah.
So now you take one oxy, it could be 15 years later, and just right off the rails. And it happens universally. And same thing with alcohol. You can't take someone who's, is sobriety for 20 years and say, oh, just have a couple drinks of alcohol. Their brain's not the same.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. And in terms of ADHD, I wanna just talk about this for a moment. ADHD, 5-10% of the population has some degree of ADHD. It has nothing to do with how smart you are. It's just how you process stuff. But it definitely puts you at risk.
Which is actually, I love that you're talking about this, because especially right now with kids that are getting, first you have a lot of people self-diagnosing themselves, which I think is probably not the best, because everybody can say, oh, I have ADD. I have ADD. It's like, yeah, a lot of us do, because you're either not interested in what you're doing right now and you don't like school. It's very different than an individual like actually getting, brought in and really diagnosed. Like, I remember, because I went into the whole psychiatrist, and I had to do all these little tests, and then, got diagnosed with ADD and ADHD. So I have both. I have the H also.
Yeah, I can see that.
So it's, thanks. What was I going to say? But I think it's important for parents to hear, kind of like keeping an eye out for their child.
Yeah, but really what I want to make the point of is that it's a real condition. That's a neurodevelopmental condition that starts in childhood. And there's a stigma with ADHD. Like you just said, there's these people on the internet, groups, voices that's downplayed as a diagnosis, say that you shouldn't be on treatment for it. It's a discipline issue. It's your parents didn't raise you right. But it's nothing like that at all. And I'll tell you, the people saying that are never doctors that actually treat people that have ADHD. Because what I see is the opposite. What I see is people who have ADHD, a significant degree of ADHD, they are struggling left, right, and center in life. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. It's not just about school. It's like organizing your basic day, not finishing things you're working on, which then makes one thing that should take a half hour takes all day long. And then it creates anxiety and the procrastination. It's not a fun way to live when you have untreated ADHD. So you guys shaking your heads, you know.
Yeah.
There's genetic components. In fact, most of the time when the parents bring in the kids, the parent gets diagnosed at the same time, because the parent goes, I know, that's me, right? There's genetics there too. And so what happens is that what we find is that if you help someone and you treat them with medicine, it changes things around completely for them, and quickly usually. And all of a sudden, there's less noise, and your thoughts are more organized, and you can say, today I'm going to do this, and that's the way you do it. It's not like number 2 on the list and 9, maybe you'll get to 4. It ain't like that anymore. And so
that's literally how my brain is, man.
Yeah, again, it has nothing to do with how smart you are.
Right.
But you don't reach what you want to do and potential. And listen, the studies show it overwhelming. More car accidents, more divorces, more, because it affects how you communicate. I mean, listen, it's a condition that has tentacles, and you got to treat it, because I'm going to tell you that some of the worst cases I've seen with addiction that don't respond to MAT, usually what I find is that there is some other mental health issue. Many times there's ADHD there, and a lot of the doctors treating them, for whatever reason, they don't treat it, or they say, oh, well, wait till you're sober for umpteen years, or some arbitrary thing that's not based on any evidence. And the person never gets treated for the ADHD, and it's a big trigger for their relapsing all the time. And it wasn't, and some of these cases, you all of a sudden, they could be on Suboxone, relapsing over and over, Vivitrol, relapsing. And then you treat the ADHD, and now they have years of sobriety. So I'm putting this out there because you're not going to probably hear a lot of doctors going into this kind of stuff, but I live it every day, and it makes a difference. So I don't like when people sort of like downplay, oh, ADHD, you're not interested in what you're doing.
Sure.
That's not fair.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are struggling.
Oh, for sure.
And that's not to say that everyone needs this certain medicines. It's up to you.
And everyone's different.
Of course. But what I see is the opposite. People think, you hear this stuff about medicine's bad, big pharma.
Yeah.
And listen, they deserve a lot of that criticism.
Yeah, they do.
They do. I agree with you. But saying you don't want any medicine, even if it helps you, is like the same as saying I want every single medicine. They're not all equal, And doctors don't get paid to write prescriptions, generally speaking, right? Certainly there are shady things going on.
Of course.
But unfortunately, everything gets blanketed with.
Yeah.
Every industry's got shady things going on. I mean, I often wonder what life would have been like had I been diagnosed correctly before I found methamphetamine, and if they would have medicated me correctly, you know, how my I get it. I don't want to change my life in any way, shape, or form, because, you know, this is the path that God had chosen me to go on, and my life has turned out beautifully. But I do often wonder, because, like, you know, my dad is a doctor. My dad is an MD with 2 PhDs. So I come from a pretty decent bloodline, and I'm like, and I struggled in school from 4th grade until I dropped out. And I dropped out because my addiction was rampant and full force, and I couldn't do life. I couldn't live life on life's terms anymore. They were on the drugs terms. So I do wonder, you know, what would have happened if I would have been medicated properly. I often think I could have been a doctor.
Well, most people, once they get treated, a lot of them say, where was this 20 years ago?
Sure.
Everyone kind of says the same thing, because, like, wow, I might have made different choices. You know, maybe I would have went on and did more school. I always thought school wasn't for me, but really, I had this issue. You know, and everyone listening that deals with this probably relates to what I'm saying, because it is that's what it is.
I have a question for this specific topic, because I hear it often. So for individuals that have ADD or ADHD, and then the medication would be like an Adderall or a Vyvanse or a Ritalin, which is amphetamine. What do you do with the addict?
Somebody like me who's a meth addict.
Correct.
You know,
and myself.
It is such a good question. You know, it's very tricky.
Yeah.
Because everyone is different, right? Even if you have ADHD, you're not the same as someone else that has ADHD, right? It's a spectrum, like everything else in medicine. And everyone's brain has a lot of different components of from one person to the next. So I've had plenty of people where you treat the ADD. But by the way, a lot of doctors won't give a stimulant to somebody who's in recovery, right? And I understand the fear in that. But I've had cases where it was so clear to me that was the missing link, that I knew that if I didn't help them with that way, that I really felt like they were just going to probably keep relapsing. And then you gave them a stimulant, and the opposite of what your fear has happened, which is much better impulse control. Cravings don't take them over. And all of a sudden they have 8 years of sobriety when before they couldn't get 3 months.
Sure.
Right? So, but I'm not saying that's everybody.
Yeah.
There are definitely people where if you were to give them a drug like that, it could trigger them to all of a sudden, you know, they could abuse it and then lead them back to the drug of choice, which is, by the way, the same thing I see with marijuana. Because it's not just about the drug, it's about your brain and how they interact, right?
Yeah.
So I've had many patients who use, because in New York, they allow medical marijuana for specifically opiate use disorder.
Oh.
And so what I see is that some people, they're in sobriety, they're doing great, and they'll use marijuana here or there if they're having some cravings or some thoughts that are worrisome, and it helps, and they keep going.
Yeah.
And for them, it helps, and it's the right thing for them. But there are people that are in sobriety from opiates that they use marijuana, and you know what? All of a sudden, you start to see, wait, they're smoking compulsively, and you know what? All of a sudden, drug of choice comes right back. It just leads them back to the drug of choice. Which I just want to say this, and I want to hear what you guys what you think about this, because I see this all the time. I've had people in opiate addiction. They get sober, or they're on MAT and they're sober, and they say, I want to have a drink. You know, my problem was never alcohol.
Oh, yeah.
Never alcohol. And I should be able to have a glass of wine, because I swear it doesn't make me like addicted to it, and I should be able to do that. It's never my drug of choice. And they're going to do what they're going to do, regardless necessarily of what you tell them.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, most often what happens is that drug does light something up, and ultimately they get led back to the drug of choice. And that's what I see most of the time. But it's a hard sell that someone doesn't want to hear that.
Because they already don't want to hear that, because they want to use an excuse to pick up something, because I hear it from this individual to my right. He'll say that alcohol isn't his drug of choice. My oldest brother says the same thing. However, which I might agree with both of you guys that it might not have been your drug of choice or your go-to. However, it will lead you down that path eventually. I truly do believe that.
I think that the potential is there. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's always going to happen.
You can't say always.
99% though.
For sure.
I gotta go 99.
Totally.
That's a made up statistic.
It is
but,
made up.
But I agree with that. I agree with that because
is.
bad decisions will happen.
Yeah, man.
You're like, we're not normal people. So
But
like your bad
I did
behavior.
it after 5 years of not doing anything. I did drink, and I still do today. And I've never gone back to my drug of choice. So I'm that one person.
Yeah, and I've had people do that.
So I don't consider myself an addict today. I consider myself in mental health recovery, where I can have a drink, I can smoke a little bit of weed. I got prescribed pills for an infection or for a procedure. I took 3 of them out of the 50. They're opioids, and that was my thing. They're still sitting in my drawer.
But opioids still weren't your thing.
Well,
right?
it was with the crack.
Crack was your thing.
Opiates and crack. Those are my two, go-tos.
But it is a slippery slope,
Very.
especially with fentanyl now.
Slippery.
That's the
Slippery.
problem.
Very.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
It's a slippery slope,
Slippery,
and I
very
mean,
slippery.
I if I can give anybody something, I would want them to get what I have, and what I have is complete abstinence from all, mind altering and mood altering substances. But,
I thought you said you drink.
Huh?
Did you say you drink?
not me.
Oh.
He does.
No, him.
I don't.
Oh, just
I have 11.
Oh
and a
no!
half years.
I say that I don't think I'm not an alcoholic.
Yeah,
but
I was saying,
I'm not about to pick up a drink.
Oh.
I was referring to Chad and my oldest brother, saying like alcohol is not necessarily
alcohol
their
is
drug
not
of
my
choice,
thing, but I do
I
think it's
believe that it will definitely, if they
Okay.
decide, say tonight they're both gonna have a cocktail.
Oh.
To
okay.
me, it will eventually lead into that drug of choice coming back into their life at some point.
Everyone's brain is different. Like you were saying, your couple drugs you were using. Sometimes it's underlying mental health issues. Sometimes there's not. Sometimes. So everyone's different, but it's slippery slope when you're dealing with fentanyl, which is killing you in a second.
Killing you.
So that's the problem.
And
it's in everything.
I mean, you know what? And people do say that to me, and in the treatment center or this or that. I've seen people get physically addicted to an opiate based on a doctor prescribing it for their injury, and next thing you know, down the road they're taking 40 pills a day, and they're addicted, and they get off of it, and they were. And I have seen people go back and be able to live a quote unquote normal life and have some drinks. More times than not, though, I see the opposite, where that alcohol becomes that gateway. And especially if you prescribe or subscribe to the 12-step program, because when you do subscribe to that, you're buying into the ideology of that recovery is about being clean and sober. And then what happens is, for me, if I go out and drink today, I'm going to feel guilty, like I just threw everything away that I've worked so hard for on a daily basis. And that in and of itself, the guilt and shame that comes with that. We haven't talked a lot about feelings, but a lot of times the reason why I use is because of feelings that I'm not good at handling or feeling
less than insecure
and
not enough.
Next thing you know, I'm calling up my dope man because I drank a couple beers. My inhibition is down. My ability to say no, that rational part of my brain where I would be like,
exactly, is already off and running.
And then that what do you it's the limbic system is telling me, Chad, you can do it one time and nobody will know.
Yeah, and I think I'd love your guys' thoughts on this. I see a lot of family. I try to talk to family members when people come in and say the emotional manipulation and the things that people do when they're in active recovery. I know it hurts to see someone you love do that, but it really is part of the condition. The brain is going to drive you to do whatever it takes to get that survival drive, to get that drug. But when someone gets sober, that's not who they are. And also, I tell patients, every time you get into recovery, when you first get there, you're going to have the guilt, the shame. It comes with the condition. Yeah. It's impossible to not do those things when you're using. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to find the drug if you didn't engage in those behaviors.
Yes.
And that's why I love 12-step programs, because you get to do the step work and speak to your sponsor, and they help you channel those feelings, because otherwise, what does someone do with that stuff? Like, oh God, look what I did to my family. Look how many years I put them through this. I put them through that, and it's a real thing. It's a real issue that holds people back. So I really try to encourage all my patients to go to 12-step meetings.
Oh, for sure. I believe in it because I've done it and haven't done it, and I continue to do it, and it's a daily thing. It's a daily reprieve that you have to stay on top of, or else I do think, and I've seen it, where people end up going back out. So it's like, the drug or the drink is merely what you pick up to basically fill whatever that we're trying to fill within us. But the 12 steps really helps you become what I think we're all searching for. And that's peace of mind and being okay with ourselves. So we're not chasing for anything else except looking at that mirror and being like, you're a stud. I like you. Let's go. Where a lot of times you can't do that because of whatever little lies you tell yourself, or the guilt or the shame or the insecurity, all the other things that are, the things that take us out. And that's why I do think that the 12-step does help individuals seek that and be able to understand them, whatever issues are going on with them, and how to deal with that so that they can build the confidence to then lead up to their fullest potential like they're supposed to.
Do you guys in your program encourage patients how's the counseling part of it work here? I mean, do you guys encourage people to go to meetings after they leave, or do you?
Oh yeah. And while they're here, we highly encourage them. And then some of the, when they get, so we're detox, RTC, PHP, IOP. And when they get to PHP and IOP, we have sober living homes in the area that, a couple of them that we run, but others we utilize. And most of those sober livings require them to go to a minimum of 5 meetings per week. Okay. And that's outside of their PHP program. So while they're here at our facility in residential, we bring in panels. We have a list of people, acceptable sponsors, and encourage them to, and then we also take them to 12-step meetings a week. We don't force 12 steps down their throat, though, because there are a lot of people that have the fear of 12 steps. So we have 2 tracks. We have a Christian-based track for people that want that direction, but it's also 12-step based. And then we have our traditional track, which incorporates the 12 steps, but it also incorporates a program that my brother-in-law created, which is it's more of a writing program. It's called The Work. And a lot of them, we incorporate both, so they get a little bit of both, but it gives them an opportunity to see what the 12 steps is like, and then it also gives them another alternative way to finding recovery.
That's excellent, because not everyone's path to recovery is going to be the same.
No.
Not everyone has to do 12-step meetings, and but they should be exposed to it.
100%.
Even just the sober support, in terms of a lot of people get very lonely, right? And that's a huge, the idle time is the devil's playground.
Yes.
And that is such a true statement.
It's true.
And so having people to do sober activities with is can be all the difference in the world in early recovery, And when I hear people go to meetings, they wrap me up. They come and said hello. Yeah. They gave me their number, and it blows people's mind. Oh my God, I'm going to have a social group.
And I'm not alone.
I'm not alone. And I think it's really wonderful.
I was more like, whoa, these people are hugging me.
Too.
I was like, dude,
I don't know you. I don't know
you. Tripping.
But you know what I think I've noticed?
But a lot of people are sitting in their house by themselves.
Yes.
In recovery. Yes. Who are they going to call now? They haven't, everyone they've been hanging out with is using or whatever it may be.
That's why we created a Zoom.
Yeah, and we have a weekly Zoom that we, it's open to everybody. It's open to people that aren't addicts, to family members that have lost their loved ones to fentanyl. This whole podcast is just, is birthed because of tragedy, because of the fentanyl crisis. So we wanted to welcome everybody. And, some of our speakers that come and speak for 20 minutes, a big majority of them are in 12-step programs. Some aren't, some have God, some have this, but you can speak however you want to speak in ours, as long as you're as long as you're bringing the pain or bringing the solution, one of the two.
That's awesome.
And I think the funny thing is, though, as much as nobody that really like pushes or the 12 steps down throats, because ultimately we want people to be happy and healthy and living to their full potential, it gets trickled in there because somehow it just appears because lots of people, that's how they're able to maintain it.
It is the last house on the block. You know, if you've tried everything else,
for sure,
you know, and it's like
Jesus, take the wheel.
Yeah, I mean, we're you know, Alcoholics Anonymous is still sitting there, and they have a seat warm for you, and it's free. Mm-hmm. You know, it doesn't even cost $1 a day. That's just a suggested. Hey, when you're ready and you're available and you can pay $1, pay $1. You need a big book. Somebody in that room, I promise you, will buy you a big book. I had a couple of things that I want to get into before we, before we get to the end of this. One, can you explain to like our listeners what a neurologist is?
Well, okay, so a neurologist is a medical doctor who helps treat conditions that involve the brain or the spinal cord. So, for example, common conditions might be epilepsy, or it could be pinched nerves in the neck or the back. Everything from spinal cord injuries, brain tumors, all kinds of things. So, but neurologists can specialize in certain areas. So, neurologists could be more pain management. Some could be more, managing epilepsy. So there's all different kinds of conditions, like any other specialty.
Yeah.
But you are a
medical doctor.
Double board certified.
But a medical doctor that has really studied the brain.
Yeah, first and foremost, I was a neurologist,
Yep.
then became an addiction doctor. And I think that actually really helped me get past some of the hurdles that some of the doctors I was seeing were really hitting up against the wall with in some of these areas. And so I think I'm grateful that I had that experience, that training before, because then I was more comfortable using, for example, certain medicines that they might not be. And that helped me a lot with those comfort medicines, right? So a psychiatrist didn't quite have the grasp on some of those neurological medicines that I could use and say, don't worry, I'm going to take care of those restless legs. Don't worry, I'm going to make sure that you're not bouncing off the walls, that your anxiety is controlled. So by doing that, that helped me help a lot of people really have the option of Vivitrol, for example. So the program that I went to and I worked at, they had nobody on Vivitrol. And every doctor would come in and say, oh, I want to use Vivitrol. And then no one would get it because the doctor, probably just didn't have the clinical skill set, but also you have to care. You have to look at a person and care and be willing to talk to them, because it's so easy to say, here's your Suboxone.
Yeah.
Everyone knows it. They're coming in looking for it. But to actually sit down with someone and say, look, you have another option, but I promise you, I got this. Like, you're going to be okay. And I'm going to help make sure that I'm not going to tell you you're not going to have withdrawal and then you are, which so many doctors do. Like, don't worry, it's going to be fine. And then they give them like the weakest kind of medicine. And then they're like, never listen to a doctor again about it, right?
Yeah.
Everyone comes in deathly afraid of withdrawal already. And so it's like, do anything, but don't give me any withdrawal. And so to offer someone Vivitrol and then have them believe you that you care, because what's the saying, right? Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Yeah. And so by caring and by knowing that I could help them, I think a lot of people are saying, okay, like, I'm going to try it, and a lot of times I'll say to them, look, if you're in withdrawal, you're feeling awful, then call me. I'll just give you the Suboxone. And that also helps them go, what do I have to lose? But of course they would make it through. And then we started, half the place was on Vivitrol. Yeah. And I'm not saying everyone has to be on Vivitrol. I'm saying, like, people should get a choice. There's options. They should even know there's an option of such a thing. So, it did help me. The neurology helped me.
Nice.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I feel like it also trickled in and helped big time into then you becoming into the addiction space, because now you have the brain that you've already got board certified, and that was your primary. And then now you have something personal, which is the loss of your brother. So addiction full, like, what that looks like. And that's really difficult for an individual that does not know what that looks like, because it's hard to logically understand the disease if you don't actually have someone in front of you that's struggling.
But I think it gave me I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think it gave me, really what I find gave me the most is the strength, and the perseverance to be in this field
Sure.
because it's not easy.
No.
Because a doctor, I know you guys know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
A doctor can only do so much.
Totally.
You could have the best plan. And in this space, you know, you could be treating someone and doing the very best you can, you know, up all night thinking about your patients. Let me tell you, that's the life of a doctor who cares in this space. You can't not, you know, you can't spend all day working with people in the trenches trying to help them relapse after it and not think about it the minute you walk out the door. You know, families are involved oftentimes. And so you know everyone. And everyone's hoping against hope, you know, against hope that their kid's not going to relapse and overdose and again, you know. And so, you know, it really, really can take a toll if you're an empathetic, you care. It's rough, you know. And so you have to hang in there and help and be wanting to help. And so I think that helped me with that.
Sure.
Because you can burn out in this field.
Oh, yeah.
Because you could do your very best and then a random Tuesday they get fentanyl and they die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's it.
That's
you
it.
know? And that is a brutal space to be in
It is.
medicine, you know?
But thank God you are.
Yeah. Well, I tell people, I know that there's no deadlier medical condition than active opiate addiction. Because how fast does it kill people?
Well, right now.
What other condition kills people
Yeah.
and ruins their life and takes everything from them that fast?
And right now,
True.
it is the #1 cause of death. CDC, I'm quoting the CDC, #1 cause of death for people 18 to 45 years old. How is that? How can I mean, I'm not asking you to, but like maybe you can answer it if you want. But how is that acceptable in society? That and how is it that the majority of the population doesn't even know what I just said? But we can look it up. The CDC, 18 to 45 years old, #1 cause of death is opioids, and particularly fentanyl.
It's not acceptable. And I think a lot of people at this point, like I said, everyone's 1 degree of separation. Like most people, if they're not affected, someone in their family
for sure.
or someone they know is. So I don't think it's acceptable. I think that, look, there's a lot of disparities. So for example, insurance coverage hasn't always been equal for addiction issues. I'm sure you guys are well aware of this, right? So that's a big problem. You know how many times I want to send someone to a 30-day inpatient and they go, no, or 14 days or 16 days. You know, that's the norm that they fight against those things, you know?
Yeah.
Or not that long ago, you prescribed someone Suboxone, they need a prior authorization. That takes 5 days. Meanwhile, the person's in withdrawal in front of you. What are you going to do for 5 days? Otherwise, the medicine's $800. Or, like, you know, the fact that that's acceptable
Agree.
blew my mind. And, you know, it's an uphill battle to get those things changed. I think it's changing, but it is like pushing things uphill. I really do. And I think this fentanyl I think that's what's going to do it, because now everyone is afraid for their kid, for their, it's on the news every night. And it's not just about, it's that family. They have addiction. We don't have that. Because it doesn't matter if you have it. Your kid's now going to go to parties. You know what percentage of kids are going to experiment with something? So, and parents know that.
Yeah, for
sure. And now you're just, all of a sudden they're going to die from experimenting with one pill. And I think that is going to make people, and it is scaring people. I hear it. Yeah.
I think so too.
I have, it's kind of want to go into this other topic just for a second. Have you seen any studies or have an opinion on semaglutide or trizipatide in the treatment of addiction in general, not just opioids?
Great question. I just got asked this in the podcast, but everyone's asking this because these drugs, you're hearing all this stuff about they're helping so many things. And you are hearing patients who are on these medicines saying, I hear less noise, less cravings. It could food cravings, less food noise. So there's something definitely going on there. There's no question. We don't know exactly what it's doing, but I think it's probably the GLP-1 medicines. That's what they are, right?
Yeah.
And basically, it mimics a hormone that we have that makes us feel full and slows down digestion. So you eat less and lose weight, right? Yeah. And they've been helping a lot of people lose weight.
Yep.
And I think they are ultimately going to help people with a lot of conditions, because a lot of those medical conditions come from being overweight and having diabetes and all those things. So, but it's probably acting centrally in the brain in some way to blunt the cues in the environment, like the triggers. I think people don't feel the triggers as much. I think that's what it's going to be. And if I could just say real quick, there's a study where they looked at people with addiction and people who never had addiction. And they do what's called PET scans, where they can inject this tracer that binds to dopamine and the receptors in the brain and so forth. And they had them look at like paraphernalia, stuff that triggers thoughts. And they want to see what lights up. And the people with addiction, that limbic area lit up tremendously. The frontal cortical area, not so much. But people didn't have addiction, a lot of frontal. You could see the thoughts were like, oh, this is dangerous. I wouldn't want to do it. All the thinking, but not in someone who had a history with addiction. It was all that brainstem limbic area lighting up, and that shows you how powerful triggers are. And that's why I want to hear what you guys have to say about this. But this is a big thing that comes up. People say, I just got sober, but is it okay if I go to a wedding? No, obviously, there's drinking everywhere, right?
I want to tell you something. My brother got married when I had 6 months. I did not go to Canada. I did not go to the wedding. I chose not to go.
A
I
huge
didn't do
deal.
it.
Happens to, yeah.
I didn't do it.
It comes up constantly.
Yeah, man. I did
It
not.
is a-
Different for everybody. I was a
did not
bartender
go.
and a bottle service girl, and I had sobriety. I
Really?
was 3 years
Wow,
sober.
good for you.
It is,
So-
but it is a thing, and like they really suggest in in the
Not-
12-step program, maybe not to not go,
Well, they have a
but take a
specific
buddy
reason.
with you.
Yeah.
And they also say if you're not supposed to be like, you have to have a
I would
real,
say
real
at 6
purpose
months,
to
Shane,
go.
sober, Shane was not spiritually fit because he was
Correct.
in rehab having sex with every girl in the
Yes.
rehab. Just not to call you out, but
It's so
Happily
true
married
though.
now. Happily married now
Well-
for 17 years.
But all of those
That's true.
back to your point is there is no one size fits
No,
all.
there's not.
Every single person
But-
is going to be very
Yes,
different.
but this is important. Let me tell you a pattern I see. I see people who say, I could go to a bar with my buddy and I can just have seltzer, right? And they'll go and maybe they will just have seltzer and they leave. And they'll say, see, I was fine. But they're usually not fine. What happens? Oh, why am I dreaming about the drug again? Why am I thinking about it? It's that limbic area. It sees the clinking of the glasses. It hears the sounds, the sights, and all of a sudden that limbic starts lighting up. And I always see, here comes the relapse 5 days later. Not when they're in the bar, or I see people that go on the cruises with all the drinks, and they go, I'm fine, I'm not gonna have it, and they don't have one on the cruise. But here comes the relapse a week later. So I'm not saying everybody.
No, but it's true. I did relapse after. So
Well,
I mean, I had 3 years and then I relapsed. So I mean, let's like call a spade a spade.
But
I'm
so
playing with the devil
people who
right there.
insist on going, I say you have to have an exit strategy. You have
Totally.
to have a plan. If you don't feel comfortable, you have to be able to leave, and your family has to understand that.
It's a good point. It's really important because people do think that they're like, I got this. Well, usually anytime
you say I got
you do
this,
not.
if you say I got this, that is a
falling
telltale sign that somebody is on the verge of relapse. Because we don't got shit
Ever.
But it does say in the Alcoholics Anonymous book, and I know I'm quoting it a lot, but it's a good book.
It's a great book.
It says that we can go anywhere and do anything as long as two things. One, we have a reason to be there, and two, that we are spiritually fit. Because in Alcoholics Anonymous, what we believe and they believe is that we get a daily reprieve based on our spiritual maintenance, right? So if I'm not spiritually fit, if I'm resting on my laurels, and I don't really have going to a bar because your buddy is going is not a reason to be there. Going to a bar or a restaurant or a wedding because your sister is getting married is a reason to be there. But are we spiritually fit to be there? And if we aren't spiritually fit enough, do I have a sober buddy that can go with me who is spiritually fit enough to walk me through that process to show me how it's done? So that's what I believe. To answer that question, should you be there? If you have a reason and you have enough recovery inside of you, in the bank, whatever that looks like for you, to be able to make it through that process.
I think the overarching point, though, is that triggers are very powerful
Oh,
in
for
recovery.
sure.
And
Insane.
people, places, things. And, we know why, by the way. When you engage in an activity that releases dopamine, there's a part of the brain, the hippocampus, your memory center, and it it unconsciously remembers so many things about that situation. The sights, the sounds, where you were, everything.
Crazy.
And it embeds it really deep in your brain unconsciously, because that could have been a delicious meal or you have to try to find again. And that triggers start lighting that up. It could be 10 years later, it could light it up. And that's and people can't, you gotta understand that you don't got this, right? Because triggers are everywhere.
Yeah.
You sit down at a restaurant, first thing, here's the liquor, here's the wine menu, here's the,
Walk into a grocery store in California, it's like the first aisle. Is the liquor aisle right by the door.
Or you at work, you see someone that looks high.
Totally.
These are common things that happen to everybody. And then that could be a trigger.
That's so funny, that part of the brain that you just talked about, because like I had this Caesar salad, and it was the best Caesar salad I have ever had in my life. And I don't remember. And every time Donna and I go to a restaurant, I'm like, is this the restaurant that had the Caesar salad? And I order it, and I have yet to find that Caesar salad. It was like really good. I mean, like,
wild.
Obviously, you have to
like that good, because
you didn't remember.
I would have remembered the restaurant, right?
But also the ADHD.
For sure.
So, what else? What else?
We covered a lot of ground.
We did.
Covered a lot of ground.
Thank you guys.
No, thank you so much for you, taking what you do in the field, but then also that is the beautiful thing about social media, is to have a voice and for you to spread your knowledge, because obviously we're addicts and alcoholics, or addict. I reference myself as an addict alcoholic, but we're all the same. And we can use our voice so
Not
much.
at that meeting yesterday.
I know, but totally. But it is a little bit different for like people that aren't, to hear from a actual MD. Double board certified is also something where people are like, oh, okay, I'm going to listen to him, as opposed to, these other individuals. So
us too.
Us messes.
But we just turned our mess into our message. That's all we've done.
Oh, yes.
Ooh, boom.
Nice.
Boom.
Nice.
But people that they can pre-order your book now. It's with our good friend, Dr. Good old Dr. Drew. Has the forward in here, which he's amazing, and we love him. So I think this is really important for people to, whether they're struggling with the disease, or even if they're a parent or a spouse or a brother or a sister that wants to actually understand the disease.
Or even a counselor.
Or even a counselor.
Or even a doctor.
Yes.
All these questions, times, they may not even know those answers.
Correct.
So
thank you so much. And you guys, can they get it on Amazon?
Absolutely.
Yes. This book will save your life. Great title.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much.
Title,
yeah, I know.
Thanks.